As usual, we have all gathered here today to listen to another exposition of the Lord Buddha's teaching. And before we commence today's sermon, let us take a moment to remind ourselves of how extremely fortunate we are to be his disciples, to be his students, to have come across the only teaching that exists to free us once and for all from the endless cycle of suffering, the only truth that excels all other truths, the only realization that is truly worth having. Let us take a moment today before we begin to acknowledge this, to reflect on this. And let us do that by reciting the stanzas that were once uttered by Upali the householder when he was once questioned, "Whose disciple are you? Who is your teacher? Who is your master?" By none other than his previous teacher, when he had come to realize that the student that he himself sent to debate with the Lord Buddha to prove that he was right and the Buddha was wrong, had come back, transformed himself when the intention was quite the opposite. Let us take a moment to reflect on that and realize for ourselves how fortunate we are. Followed by this, we will take refuge in the Noble Triple Gem, observe the precepts, invite the celestial beings, the divine beings, seek forgiveness for any offenses that we may have made through speech, body, or mind towards the noble ones, and we will continue with the remainder of today's proceedings. So let us be upstanding then to pay homage to the most magnificent one, the perfect one, the immaculate one, the unparalleled one, the infinitely virtuous one, the unimaginably compassionate one, the Gautama Supreme Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Dhirassa vigata mohassa pabhinna khilassa vijita vijayassa anighassa susamachitassa buddha silassa sadhupanyassa vessantarassa vimalassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi akatanka tusitassa vantalokamissassa muditassa kata samanassa manujassa antima sarirassa narassa anopamassa virajassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi asansayassa kulassa venaikassa sarati varassa anuttarassa ruchira dhammassa nikhankassa abhasakarassa manachidassa virassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi nisabhassa appameyassa gambhirassa monapatassa khemankarassa vedassa dhammattassa sangutattassa sangatigassa muttassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi nagassa pantasenassa khina sanyojanassa muttassa patimantakassa dhonassa pannadhajassa vitaragassa dantassa nippapanchassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi isi sattamassa akuhassa tevijjassa brahmapattassa nahatakassa padakassa passaddhassa viditavedassa purindadassa sakkassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi ariyassa bhavitattassa pattipattassa veyyakaranassa satimato vipassissa anabhinatassa noapanatassa anejassa vasipattassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi ariyassa bhavitattassa pattipattassa veyyakaranassa satimato vipassissa anabhinatassa noapanatassa anejassa vasipattassa bhagavato tassa savako hamasmi. And now to observe the precepts and seek refuge in the Noble Triple Gem. Please repeat all together and after me. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi Saṅgham saranam gacchāmi Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi Dutiyampi dhammaṃ saranam gacchāmi Dutiyampi saṅgham saranam gacchāmi Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi Tatiyampi dhammaṃ saranam gacchāmi Tatiyampi saṅgham saranang gacchami. Sarana-gamanang sampunnang panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Adinādāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kāmesu micchāchārā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musāvādā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Surameraya majjapamadaṭṭhāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Tisaranena saddhiṃ pañcasīlaṃ dhammang sādhukaṃ surakkhitāṃ kattvā appamādena sampādeta. Okay, you may all now be seated. Let us now take a moment to invite all the countless beings in the 10,000 world systems with our within earshot of this sermon. Let us not forget that among them will be those who will have been mothers and fathers to us, brothers and sisters, our relations, and sometimes perhaps the closest among them. But today they have been either born in a waffle plain or born in a place where they might not readily have access to the Dhamma. However, we are a grateful type. We are grateful for all that others have done for us. And therefore, with that gratitude, when we receive the greatest gift there is, the greatest gift that one could receive, what we wish to do is to pass it on to others. And therefore, that is exactly what we are doing today. Let us take a moment to invite all those countless beings who will have been our mothers and fathers, uncles, aunts, cousins, nephews and nieces and so on. If it may be that they are lacking in merits, may they rejoice in this meritorious deed. And may those merits free them from any woeful planes they might be born in and give them birth in the blissful plane. For any among them who are already in the blissful plane, may they listen to the teaching of the Great Master, understand and comprehend it, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. As I now make this invitation out to all of them, I ask you all to invite them in your hearts and in your minds, with compassion emanating out to all of them, reminding yourself that they are just like you. When caused to suffer, you shall suffer. They are just like that. Let us invite them with compassion, with mercy, and with loving kindness, such that they may rejoice in these merits, better themselves, listen to the Dhamma, comprehend it, and free themselves once and for all from all suffering. Samanta Chakravalesu Atra Gachantu Devata Saddhammang Munirajasansa Sunantu Sagga Mokkadang Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayang Bhadanta Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayang Bhadanta Dhamma savana kalo ayang bhadanta. And now that we are all present here, let us take a moment to remind ourselves that although today we have received the association of moral and noble ones, in this long journey in samsara, due to the very consequences of our own actions and not that of any others, we have not always had this good opportunity. Our associations have virtually always been with ignoble, immoral people, and these associations defiled our minds with desire, aversion, and delusion. We all know this, and we must all accept this. Having done so, we realize that during these times, on countless occasions we would have offended, insulted, reviled, and desecrated the noble ones. The Samma Sambuddhas and the Pacceka Buddhas, Arahata Buddhas, Anagami, Sakradagami, Sotapannas be they on the path of having attained the fruits, as well as the Buddhas minister the Sambuddha Shasana. Therefore, as we are about to embark on a journey of achieving true freedom, setting aside our suffering, and to do that, preparing ourselves to set aside our egos, let us take a moment to seek their forgiveness for any thoughts, words, or actions of offense, revile, desecration, and slander that we might have directed towards them, either knowingly or unknowingly. And as you take a moment to do this, I urge you to make a solemn promise to yourself to never conduct yourself in this manner ever again. And finally, let us all make a firm resolve that may through the course of this sermon, we be able to realize the Four Noble Truths and free ourselves once and for all from suffering, or at least to embark on that journey. And for any among you who may already have achieved that noble state, may through the course of this sermon, you be able to fulfill the subsequent stages, and may we all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. With that resolve in mind, I invite you all to prepare yourselves now to listen to this sermon. Okay. I'm going to go straight into questions today. We have received a few questions. Which, upon reading, I felt may be of good use and benefit to others as well. This question is rather short, but just looking at it and reading it, I found myself thinking to myself, if I make any attempt to answer this question, then I probably won't be able to discuss anything else throughout the service. Sometimes disguised in brevity, you discover much profoundness. And I think this is a good example of it. The question itself is only 4 lines. The question has been raised off the back of a sermon titled How Pleasure Works, Learn the Science Behind This Mental Phenomenon. I imagine most of you will have listened to that by now. And it's a very good question, it's a very interesting question. Let us see how far we can get to provide a satisfactory answer. So here goes nothing. These sermons are invaluable. I'm immensely grateful that they're being shared here on YouTube, which is the only way I can hear the Buddha Dhamma at the moment. I imagine this is from a listener outside of Sri Lanka. I have a question, Bhante. When we are attached to something, what/who is vexing? When the mind passes away, before it arises again, before the relief from vexation happens. I'll repeat the question. When we are attached to something, what or who is vexing? When the mind passes away, before it arises again, and before relief from vexation happens. The question itself is only 2 lines. But the answer to this, the Buddha spent 45 years preaching. His entire lifetime he spent giving the answer to this very question. As I said, the question itself seems very benign, very simple, very humble, but oh, what a question. So let's try and see if we can unwrap this question and try to find some answers. First and foremost, let us take a moment to remind ourselves who we are. Because the question starts by saying, when we are attached to something. So this is clearly talking about us. So let's understand first who we are. Who are we? Really? Who are you? What do you know about yourself? Who are you? Is all of you you? Are you sure? Can you point yourself out to me Is all of you you? Okay, you're all listening to this at home. Okay, so you're safe at home, you're in a safe environment. See if you can follow these instructions and try and come up with some answers to the questions that follow. I'd like you to touch your head with the palm of your hand or finger. Okay? If you're touching your head right now, let me ask you the question. Is that you? So using your fingers, the fingertips, I want you to touch your head. And it's fine, you may have, most of you will have hair. So you'll be touching your hair when I ask you to touch your head, and that's perfectly fine. My question is that you? So you're touching your hair, right? And that's you? Is that you? Okay. So if that is you, if we were to take a pair of scissors and cut off that bit of hair that you were touching a moment ago, you can stop touching now. If we cut off that bit of hair, or if we were to take a razor and shave that bit off, now something that was you, we've just cut off, haven't we? We've shaved off a bit of you, because that was you, right? So if when you touched your head and you felt your hair using your fingertips, and you said that was you, when we shave that bit of hair off, or cut that bit of hair off, we must have cut a bit of you. We must have shaved off a bit of you. If that's true, then you must feel a little bit less you than you did a moment ago. I mean, when I say the word you, and I'm looking at you and I'm talking to you, right? When I say the word you, for instance, when I say, how are you? You immediately become aware of yourself, don't you? So if someone asks you, hey, how are you? Now you have to answer that question. When someone asks, how are you? You become aware of yourself. Even if you were thinking about something else up until that point in time, when you're asked the question, how are you? You refocus your consciousness, your awareness even, to yourself. And to answer this question, assuming that you want to answer this question honestly, because it is a personal question, although people ask it very freely and openly these days, it's a very personal question. If you want it to be, if you want to share all the details, you could. But to be truthful, in responding to this question, you actually have to be aware of yourself. So you'd think to yourself, okay, he's asking about me. How am I actually? So I can answer this question. How do I actually feel? It's like when you go to the doctor, for instance. Say you're going back for a repeat appointment, and the doctor asks you, so you've come back. How are you doing? How are you feeling? How are you? Now, before you answer this question, even if it is for a tiny moment, you will become self-aware. You'll feel that. I think you're all familiar with this feeling that I'm talking about. It can't be a novel feeling to any one of you. If you've lived, if you've existed inside a body, then you know the feeling I'm talking about. Your consciousness focuses all its attention on yourself. So essentially, you check yourself from head to toe, how you feel, and you also ask yourself emotionally how you feel, and then you might respond to that question. So having stated that, because we're trying to figure out who it is that is attached to this something. When we are attached to something, who's this we that is attached to something? And I ask you the question, put your finger on your head and tell me if that is you. And assuming you have answered yes to that question, if we shave a bit of your hair off, do you now feel less you or less yourself than you did a moment ago? Do you? If I were to blindfold you and cut your hair without your knowledge, let's say you were asleep. So before you went to sleep, you had all your hair on you, and then you slept, you went into a deep sleep, and in your sleep, someone's come and cut off some of your hair, particularly the bit that you touched with your fingertip and said, this is part of me. Now, with that bit shaved off or cut off, and you wake up, without looking at yourself in the mirror, would you immediately feel that something's not right? I just feel less than myself. I feel less me than I did before I went to bed. Have you ever felt that way? I think the answer is pretty obvious. None of us have ever felt that way. Otherwise, the barbers would be a fantastic place to feel less burdened with yourself. So I think something is not quite right when you say that my head is me. Okay, let's try another place then. How about your hand? So using one hand, you could touch the other hand. Now I'm going to ask you the question again. Is that you? What are you just touching? Right now you're touching your hand with the tip of a finger from the other hand. Is that you that you just touched? What, the touching finger or the feeling finger, you might ask, or the feeling hand? Either. Are you touching yourself? Is that you touching yourself? Which part of that is you? Now, of course, we know that you're composed of many millions of, if not billions of skin cells. And the outermost skin layers are always peeling off. Doesn't take a great deal of friction to rub off the most superficial layers. So, with you shedding skin cells like falling leaves in autumn, is that you being scraped off? So once you say you jump in the shower or have a bath, and at the end of that, you've brushed your skin, you've and all the skin the outer layers of your skin has been washed off, do you get out of the bath or come out of the shower feeling less yourself? Has that ever happened? I think again the answer is obvious. No. So to be touching your hand or your arm or practically any other part of your body, and then to say, this is me, I think there's fundamentally something wrong with that. Would you agree with me? Because, when we talk about ourselves, right? When we talk about ourselves, when we talk about how you feel, how you are, you're really talking about a feeling, isn't it? As in, it's how you sense yourself. Do you not feel yourself? Do you not sense a presence? Aren't you aware of your being? This is self-awareness. So if you are how you feel, then if something about you has changed, it has to be something that you feel that has changed. But then we could do all sorts of things to the physical body, and most of the time, how you feel about yourself has nothing to do with it. Okay, so that's on the exterior. What about the interior? Let's say, for instance, there's a blood donation campaign, and you're feeling particularly charitable. You feel like you want to do your part, right? So you trot along and sign up to this blood donation campaign. You lay down on the bed, and the good nurses, they come and puncture your skin and insert the syringe, and they draw out some blood. And of course you feel the prick initially, and then they hook you up to the device that they have to draw your blood, and now the blood is being drawn out of you into a bag, a blood bag. Now we're talking about what's on the inside that is now leaking out of you. Is that you? The blood that's coming out of you, is that you? Is that part of you? Because if it is you, if that is you, if your blood is you, or at least if it is part of you, then as blood is drawn out of you, you must feel less you than you did before that syringe got inserted, or at least before the first drop of blood was drawn out of you. Am I right or wrong? Assuming that this blood, which 6 pints of it inside of you, that's a lot of it. If that is part of you, then with every drop that is drawn out of you, you should feel less yourself. Quite literally, you should feel less yourself. But do you? If it is that you may have given blood or donated blood in the past, then you will be able to agree with me that actually that has absolutely no effect on how you feel yourself. You don't feel less yourself at the end of a blood donation. How about if the opposite were done to you? So, a blood transfusion. You needed blood, and someone else's blood is now being pumped into you. Do you now all of a sudden feel like somebody else? If this blood that is being pumped into you was drawn out of someone else. I mean, when would they pump in your own blood into your own system? That doesn't usually work like that. So someone else's blood is being pumped into you because you need a blood transfusion. Now, as this blood is pumped into your veins, do you feel less you, or do you feel more you than you did before the transfusion? No, that doesn't happen either. Let's go one step further. Sometimes people have organ transplants. They undergo an organ transplant surgery, either because a part of them have gone wrong, or maybe it's time to replace it because it's not functioning as best as it should. So what happens then is a part of you gets taken out, and let's, for instance, say a kidney. You feel like donating a kidney to someone who needs it, and so you got a pair, and medical science will tell you that you could live off of one. So one of your kidneys is donated, you donate your kidney. Now, you may know that in some parts of the world, that sometimes people get kidnapped. They are made unconscious, and then people get kidnapped, and when they regain their consciousness, it seems as if nothing has happened. But if you feel your back, then there's a slight incision, a small cut that has been sewn up, and later do you realize that actually someone has taken your kidney. But even if this were the case, or even if you donated your kidney willingly, do you feel less you? No? Well, then how about if you were given someone else's organ, either a kidney or a heart transplant? Do you feel any more yourself, or do you feel like someone else? No, you see, so these things never happen. When you cut your fingernails, or when you trim them, and the nail clippings fall off your fingertips and you collect them and throw them in the bin, as you do that, do you feel somehow that you lighten? Do you feel less yourself? As your fingernails grow, do you feel more of yourself? I think that's plenty of examples there to help you figure out that actually this body of yours, it would be hard to convince anyone that actually this body is you. Of course, you could get hurt, right? You could cut yourself, and that would hurt. There's no doubt about that. It might be so painful that you'd start screaming. You could stub your toe on something, and that might hurt pretty bad. And that feeling of pain will be there with you for some time. But does that make you feel more or less you? I'm not talking about whether it hurts or not. Does it make you feel less you or more you? You know, the feeling of yourself. Like, if I were to say, how big are you? I don't mean the size of your body. I mean, how big do you feel? Like, if I were to ask you to take a piece of paper and a pen, right? And I ask you to close your eyes And now I would like you to draw a circle. With your eyes closed, draw a circle. And I'd like for you to draw this circle, and this circle must represent how big you feel. How big you feel. You should try that sometime. Try and draw a circle, say how big you feel. Open your eyes, look at it. So that's how big you feel. Now you go and take a wash, or you trim your fingernails, or have a haircut. Do you feel any smaller than you did a moment ago, than when you drew that circle? Do you feel any bigger? I think what you realize is making changes to this physical body of yours, either on the outside or on the inside, does not make you feel any more or less you. What does that tell us? What that tells us is the physical body that we possess is, of course, able to inflict upon us various sensations. I mean, you feel touch, you feel pain, you feel the heat, you feel cold, you feel pressure. These are the basic sensations that are felt by the body. You could feel a tummy go upset. That's pain coming from the inside, or pressure, either inside or outside. You can feel all these sensations. But none of these things affect how big you feel. In other words, how you feel yourself. But rather, these are all external stimuli, and these sensations are about external sensations that are received by this feeling of yourself. I think given all that, the long and short of that is, in the discovery of who it is that is attached to something, on our quest to find out who is it that is attached to something, and who is vexing, or who is suffering, I think we can put aside this physical body without any further consideration. Some people have legs and arms amputated, and they don't feel any less themselves. Particularly if you don't know you just had a limb amputated. Some people, they wake up not even knowing that they'd been in an accident, they'd lost consciousness, and part of the treatment was to amputate an arm or a leg. All of that happened during surgery, during a state of unconsciousness, and having regained consciousness, if you're not able to sense the rest of your body, or move parts of it, or actually at least see yourself, look at yourself, then people wouldn't even realize that a part of them had been amputated. So you see, I think we can put aside this body in our quest for finding out or for discovering who is it that is vexing, who is it that is suffering, and who is it that is attached to something. So, putting the body to aside, what are we left with? What else do you feel? Putting the body to aside, what else do you feel? What are some of the emotions you feel that have nothing to do with the body? What about love? Does love have anything to do with the body? The feeling of love? What about the feeling of sorrow? What about the feeling of joy? What about the feeling of disappointment? The feeling of victory? The feeling of triumph? The feeling of misery? The feeling of contentment? These are all feelings. Feelings that are not felt by the body, but rather by something else. And that something else is, of course, yes, it is the mind. I think there is no doubt that you're all in agreement that we are composed of these two things. There's the body and there's the mind. We've already discussed the body, so let's put the body to a side, and now we are left with the mind. Oh, the mind. This magnificent thing, the mind. Mesmerizing. So confounded. People still understand very little about it. There's an entire discipline of science dedicated to its study, the study of the mind or psychology, and how the mind works, its behaviors, and so on. But I think it would be fair to say that people have understood very little about the mind in the time of entire human history. There's probably nothing that has been studied less and understood less, or maybe studied but understood less, than the mind itself. So, question: when we are attached to something, who or what is vexing? How do you know you're attached to something? What is a sure and short way of figuring out that you're attached to something? If you're attached to something, then undeniably, when that one thing, and that thing could be a person, it could be a material object, it could be an idea, it could be anything, quite literally it could be anything. It could even be how you feel about something. You could be attached to how you feel about something else. One fine way of figuring out if you're attached to something is, and I think we all know this, take it away and see what that does to you. One of the best ways to figure out if you're attached to something is to take it away and see what that does to you. If it does absolutely nothing to you, you feel neither happy nor sad, you're indifferent. Entirely. Completely. Honestly. You can't trick yourself. You have to be entirely honest. If you feel entirely indifferent to something being taken away from you, then it would be safe to say that that thing is not something that you're attached to. So how do you say if you are in fact and indeed attached to something? Well, if something's taken away from you and the way you felt or how you felt up until that point changes at least one tiny bit, changes even one tiny bit, then that is good evidence that there is some kind of attachment, some kind of connection, some affiliation between you and the object in question. Of course, now we are talking about the mind. So, when something's taken away, and that could be something physical, although we're talking about mental sensations, mental emotions, it could be something physical. See, that's the funny thing. We know fully well that the mind is unable to come into contact with the physical world because, and why is that? It is because the mind is not a physical entity. I think we know that. Of course, the body is a physical entity, but the mind isn't. But do you see that a physical thing could be taken away from you and the mind can be made to suffer? That somehow doesn't even sound right, does it? It just doesn't feel right. When the mind is something that is, when the mind is, well, it's the mind, so it's got to be mental, it can't be physical. You can't touch the mind. You can't answer the question, how heavy is it? What color is it? How large is it or how small is it? Is it solid, liquid or gas? You couldn't answer any of these questions. And therein you have to come to the conclusion that it is not physical. It is not a physical entity. However, a physical object could be taken away from it, or could be taken away, full stop, and the mind feels an emotion. Don't you see there's something wrong here? I mean, how could that be possible? When the mind never actually fully experienced the physical object, how is it that a physical object can be taken away and the mind made to suffer? And the mind made to even sense it or feel it, experience it? How is that possible? Something we need to think about. Let's take a really simple example. You see a child playing with something, let's say a toy car. You take away the toy car without the child's permission, and the child feels this. So you, say for instance, take it away from its hand. Is it reasonable that the hand now feels that a car is missing or that some object is missing? Absolutely. Why? Because the hand is a physical object, and this object was in contact with another object, that was the car, the toy car, and now that we've taken it away from the child's hand, then it's perfectly reasonable that the child feels that something's missing, something's wrong, something's changed. However, you've never seen a hand cry. You've never seen a disappointed hand, have you? A frustrated, annoyed hand? But take this toy car away, and you'll have a very frustrated, a very annoyed child. What's happened? You take away a physical object, and you have caused a mental ripple. How is that possible? See, in the study of the mind, we need to try and find some answers to these things. How is it two disparate things? When you influence one, something completely different, completely uncharacteristic of the very object that was made to change has been impacted, has sensed the change. How is that so? Then you need to try and figure out, to try and find some answers to these questions. Is it really the physical object or the taken away of the physical object that has caused this effect on the mind? This is a question that you need to try and find an answer to. Is it truly the taking away of the physical object that has caused this mental ripple? Because it seems impossible, doesn't it? I mean, think of it the other way around. Let's say, for instance, the mind was affected by some way. Does that have a feeling? Does that have an effect on the physical body? Does it not? Does it? Does it not? What do you think? If you scare someone, do you not see signs physically that someone's scared? Hair standing up on their body. Sometimes they start sweating. Heart begins to beat faster. If you make someone happy, you see a physical response to that. You could crack a joke at someone. I mean, that joke, these are just words, right? But we know that when we crack a joke, its impact is initially sensed by the mind. It is the mind that we try and make laugh. Not the body. It's the mind that you're trying to make laugh. However, as you try and tickle the mind, you realize that actually it has caused a ripple effect. This time a physical ripple. The body changes. You know someone's laughing when you can see a physical reaction to something that was initially induced as a mental phenomenon. How does that work? So it becomes apparent to us that there appears to be a two-way connection here. You could speak to the mind and instigate a physical reaction on the one hand, and you could also stimulate the body and instigate a mental response. So clearly there's a connection of some sort between the mind and the body, but it almost seems like that shouldn't be the case. It seems impossible. Why? Well, because one's physical, the other's mental. At what point does physical convert to mental? And at what point does mental convert to physical? Now, I'm sure there will be lots of work going on around the world by scientists, doctors, specialists in the fields of the study of mind and matter to try and explain this phenomenon. How the mind influences the body and how the body can influence the mind. We, of course, also have, as Buddhists, the teachings of the Buddha to try and understand this phenomenon. A perfect science. Now, I cannot, for the life of me, claim that I'm an expert in the matter, because there are teachings of the Buddha are far too numerous for me to ever study and understand all of it throughout my lifetime. However, I have been fortunate enough to take many glimpses of the Buddha's teachings, where he shows the interconnect between the physical and the mental realms. All of this is interesting and important in us trying to understand a response to this question. When we're attached to something, who or what is vexing when the mind passes away, before it arises again and before the relief from vexation happens. So, if we were to summarize what we have discussed thus far over the last hour or so, we agreed that we are made up of physical substance, matter, and the mind, which we cannot really say is anything physical, but we know it's present because we can feel it. But because we can't quantify it as matter, then using the principles of simple physics, we'd have to say it's an energy. So we have matter and we have energy. This matter and energy duality is what composes us, is what we are comprised of, what we are composed of. So when we are attached, which part of this are we attached with? Essentially, there's a third component, of course, which is mind and body, or energy and matter, and the interconnect between these two. Because they're as disparate as they may be, there is clearly a connection between the two that cannot be denied. We know this because stimulating one triggers a response in the other. And how do we know that we are attached to something? We know we are attached to something as we just discussed a moment ago, take it away, and if there's any kind of response, then we know that there is attachment there. And this is true even physically. So, for instance, your fingers are attached to your hand. How do we know? Try and take a finger away and see what happens to the hand. Will you notice something? Will there be a change? Will there be some reluctance? Yes, of course there will be. Usually in the form of pain. As you sense pain, you know that your finger is attached to your hand. Likewise, if the mind is attached to something, you take it away and you will sense a response. This we call mental suffering. So take something away that the body is attached to, you will feel pain or physical suffering. Take something away the mind is attached to, and you will feel mental suffering. Or you could say disappointment. Now, what is it that is attached? And what or who is vexing? If we are composed of the mind and body, and attachments can only come in these two forms, as in physical attachment to the body and mental attachment to the mind, then of course, when you take away that which the mind or body is attached to, then it has to be either the mind or body that suffers. And we have all felt both these types of suffering. In the mind, the thoughts arise, and these thoughts are attached to various things. What things? Anything that it believes is pleasurable, it is attached to. Anything, absolutely anything. It doesn't have to be physical, although it could be. It could just be an idea. It could be the way you feel about something. So you could be attached to the thing, and you could also be attached to the way you feel about that thing. Say, for instance, someone's looking at the sunset. They're gazing at the sunset, and one day you feel really good about it. You feel that it's a beautiful sight, and you are quite pleased about the fact that you are able to appreciate the beauty of a sunset. But let's say the following day or sometime later, you come and you observe the same sight, but you don't get the same emotion. You don't feel the same way you did last time you observed it. Today, you're looking at the same thing. It's the same sight, but you're feeling different to how you felt the first time. And sometimes that in itself could be a disappointment. You're just not feeling the same way that you used to, or as you used to, about the same thing. Even on a personal level, if you sometimes don't feel about someone the way you felt on a previous occasion, that in itself can be disappointing. It is certainly something we have come to expect from others, isn't it? If you know that someone doesn't feel about you the same way they did previously, especially if you enjoyed and liked the way they felt about you, and now they don't feel that way anymore, then that is a cause for disappointment. Don't you love me anymore? You can hear people asking others. And this is evidence of that. So, once again, there's the body, there's the mind, and there's the interconnection between these two. Is there anything else? Are you composed of anything else? Do you comprise anything else? Everything you feel about yourself, could you not explain in terms of the mind and body? Do you feel there's a need for another entity to explain how you feel about yourself? Could it not all be explained through the mind and body? All physical sensations you can explain as being exactly that, a physical sensation. And then all mental emotions you can explain as being mental emotions. Have you ever felt anything else? And so when we talk about ourselves, about how we feel about ourselves, would you not agree that whenever you talk about yourself, you're talking about either how you feel physically or you're talking about how you feel mentally? Your emotional state. So you're talking about your physical sensations and you're talking about your mental sensations. How you perceive your mind and body. So I think we can agree then. So these are the two entities that comprise us. An attachment can be both physical or mental. Or at least either physical or mental. So physically you could be attached to something. How do you know? Try and take it away, and usually you will experience a painful sensation. The same concept applies mentally. If you're attached to something, take it away, and you will feel a painful sensation. This time, of course, in the mind. This is why on previous occasions I've asked you to do this from time to time, to see what things you may be attached to. It is important, folks, that you do this from time to time, because otherwise sometimes you could be blind to some things, and perhaps you could call them your blind spots. Some things you may develop an attachment, sometimes over a period of time, unbeknown to you. You could grow an attachment to them. But because you are never made aware of these things, you don't feel that something needs to be done about them. This is why in the past I've asked you to try and anything that you have gotten into the habit of either doing or experiencing, from time to time, try and change things around and see how that makes you feel. If you're used to getting up, from the same side of the bed every day, try getting up from the other side and see how that makes you feel. If you are used to eating off the same plate, try and see if you can do that using another plate. You'll be surprised at things that you couldn't get attached to. If you are used to eating at the same spot every day, if you're used to a particular diet and you have been doing it for some time, it has become a habit, try changing things around from time to time and see how that makes you feel. There may be some food items which you don't even know you're attached to. It could be something as innocent as your cup of tea in the morning. You may not know that you are in fact attached to it. It seems so harmless because it doesn't seem to do anything untoward. And because it is something that is habitual, because it is something that you are able to experience every day, you don't normally spot the fact that you may be attached to it, hence why I call it a blind spot. So you need to learn to spot your blind spots. First, you need to recognize that you may have them, and secondly, you need to actively seek them out. So it may be your morning tea. It may be the newspaper. It may be your tie. It may be your suitcase, maybe your bag, maybe a book, maybe an item of clothing. It may be the way you dress your hair, maybe the way you brush it. It may be your toothpaste. It may be the soap that you use. It's always best from time to time to change things around, to shuffle things about, to try something a little bit different, just to check yourself. Even more powerful if someone else can do it on your behalf. Because when you're doing it yourself, then you know it's coming. But if someone else does it on your behalf, and usually without warning, then you may be able to spot your blind spots better. But it's important to check your blind spots. Not just when you pull up your car, but also in your life as you go through it. Checking your blind spots from time to time is an important thing to do. Because the thing is, today there may be your blind spots because you have gotten used to them and you've gotten used to having them with you. Whenever you need it, whenever you want it. And it may be that there hasn't been a day in your life where you have not had it. So therefore you don't know what it feels like not to have it. I'm not saying or even suggesting that the best way to break a temptation, the best way to break an attachment is to take it away from someone. I disagree with that. Because taking something away from someone or absence, as we know, only makes the heart grow fonder. So you take something that someone really likes keep it away from them for a while, and then if you were to return it to them, in that period of absence, longing for it over the same period of time will make that reunion or the coming together, coming back together, the reunion of it, all the more pleasurable. So, what must one do? Make it a habit of yours from time to time to do some checks and balances. Look into your blind spots, because everyone has them. Everyone has them. Practically everyone has them. It's difficult to spot them. Then that's why they're called blind spots. So you need to be aware of them. And you don't even know that they're things you're attached to. Therefore, normally, under normal circumstances, these are not things that you would use to check yourself. So that's something to bear in mind. Returning to the point we were discussing there. So we have the mind, we have the body, and we have the interconnect between these two. Right? And how do we know if either of these is attached to something? Take it away, and the experience is normally a painful one. If, however, on the other hand, the experience is a pleasurable one, then is that evidence to us that there is no attachment? Not so. Why not so? When something's taken away from you, if that makes you feel good, then what you have been attached to is the opposite, or the absence of something. You've been attached to not having it in your life or in your presence, which is why taking it away from you makes you feel better. So, for both these reasons, it's interesting from time to time to move things around in your life a little bit from time to time and see how that makes you feel. Does it make you feel sad and disappointed, or does it make you feel happy and joyful? Either of these two feelings, or either of these two types of feelings, will be an indication that attachment has something to play in this situation. And wherever there is attachment, well, we have work to do. We have work to do. Thoughts arise in the mind. They arise and they pass away. This much we know. And we have proved this to ourselves using various examples. The fact that you can see anything and that it can change in the next moment without leaving an imprint on your mind, or at least a solid, everlasting imprint on your mind, is proof that as thoughts arise, after their useful life, they pass away. That is why you can be shown something and it can be taken out of your line of sight, and then that image that was drawn in your mind has disappeared, or it disappears along with that. If that weren't the case, then one thought and that would live on forever. You would never be able to see two things or different things. So we know for ourselves, we know to ourselves that the mind arises, or thoughts arise and pass away in the mind. So then what is attachment, and where does attachment, what role does attachment have to play in the mind? And when the mind is attached to something, or when the thoughts are attached to something, then who is vexing? What is vexing? When the thought is attached to something, and the thing that the thought is attached to is taken away from it, then of course, it is the thought itself that will suffer. So, when the thought is attached to something, then it is the thought itself that will vex. When attachment is removed from the mind through the practice of the path, and initially by entering the stages of enlightenment, and then subsequently as you follow the path and become an arahant, then there comes a day when anything could be taken away from the mind, and there are no feelings of resentment, regret, remorse, or repentance. There are no feelings of disappointment. There are no feelings of anger, sorrow, or grief, or even fear for that matter. Now, this question specifically asks, if it is the mind that vexes, or the thoughts in the mind that vex, when the thought has passed away, so here it says when the mind is passing away, but let's think of it as thoughts arising and passing away in the mind, where the mind is considered the faculty. When the thoughts pass away in the mind, then what is vexing? Or who is vexing? I'm going to flip the question on its head. And I want you to think about this. The mind, through its practice of the Dhamma, the cultivation of the Noble Eightfold Path, will eventually free itself of attachment, yes or no? And hence free itself of vexation. Now, if it is the mind that is rid of attachment, and therefore the thoughts that arise in this mind are free of attachment, then as this thought arises and passes away, what is it or who is it that is not vexing? So I've just turned it on its head and I've put it back to you. If through attachment thoughts vex, or there's attachment in the mind, and when thoughts arise and pass away, the question here is who or what is vexing? My question back to you then, sir, madam, is when the mind is void of attachment, when attachment has been completely eradicated from the mind, and then each thought arises is a pure thought that has no attachment, that is not tarnished by attachment, then what is not vexing? So what is not vexing now? What would you have to say? Who or what is not vexing? If your question is who or what is vexing in the presence of attachment, my question to you is who or what is not vexing then in the absence of attachment? Could you say it's the Arahant that is not vexing? Which part of the Arahant is the Arahant? Do you want to show him to me? Are we going back there? That's where we started. We've made some progress. Do we need to get back to square one? I doubt it. Which part of the Arahant is the Arahant? Is it the head, the body, the eyes or ears, feet, hands, palms, arms? No? So it's not the outside body? Okay, well, how about the inside? Is it the blood? The organs? Now the same stories could apply here. The same examples that we learnt and discussed before. An Arahant goes through a blood transfusion. An Arahant receives an organ transplant. Or donates some blood. Donates an organ. What would they feel? How would they feel? Are they going to feel less of themselves? Or more of themselves? Do they feel a self? What would they be entitled to? Again, mind and body, right? What is it about them that became an Arahant? Is it the body or is it the mind? What is it about them that practiced the Noble Eightfold Path? The body or mind? How do you know which part of them practiced the path? Well, if it is attachment that is gotten rid of through the practice of the path, then we know, don't we, that wherever attachment exists, try and remove something that the mind or body is attached to, and therein is pain or mental suffering. So now, having practiced and fulfilled the path, you have an Arahant. Let's try and take away something that is physical and mental and see which part no longer suffers and which part still suffers. If you were to remove a finger of the Arahant from his hand, is that not going to cause them pain? Just as it did for you, or just as it did to them before they became an Arahant, it's going to be as painful. No difference there. But take away anything that is mental or that was intended for the mind, and you're not going to get any reaction. Not the same reaction as before. So what that means is, the practicing of the path, the cultivation of the Noble Eightfold Path, did its trick on the mind. How do we know? Well, if it's attachment that is made rid of or gotten rid of through the practice of the path, then how do we know if something is attached to something? Takes that thing which it is attached to, or which you presume is attached to, and see if it suffers. Take away anything from the mind of the Arahant and there is no suffering. So therefore, that attachment was gotten rid of in the mind. Therefore, the practice of the path was directed towards the mind. There we have our logic. So, in the presence of attachment then, who or what is vexing? My question back to you. In the absence of attachment then, who or what is not vexing? Well, the simple answer, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is the mind itself. Wherever there is attachment, it is there suffering exists. You can't have attachment in one place and suffering in another place. Use the example of the hand and the finger, as I explained to you previously. If you were to pull out one of your fingers where it is attached to your hand, then as you pull it with the intention of trying to remove it, pull it off, what part of the hand is going to experience the most amount of pain? The very point where the finger is attached to the hand, isn't it? So similarly, wherever it's attached to, the mind, that's exactly where vexation takes place. That's exactly where suffering takes place. So in the mind, we know thoughts arise and pass away, and each of these thoughts would be drenched in attachment due to ignorance, and therefore it is the thoughts that suffer. The thought itself, the very thought itself, the consciousness. You could take it as the consciousness, the chittas even, that suffer because it is the chitta that is attached. They suffer. It is they that are vexed. So, could you ask the question, who then? In the presence of attachment, who is vexing? How would you identify a who when we are only able to see a mind and body? And as we have discussed, changes to the body does not have any impact on who we feel we are. So therefore it can't be anything to do with the body. And so we are left with the mind, in which chittas arise and pass away, thoughts arise and pass away, thoughts which are triggered by thought objects arise and pass away, So when there's attachment to that particular thought, then of course, or in that particular thought, towards the particular thought object, then of course attachment or vexation is in the thought itself. And that is why when the mind becomes an arahant, and you wouldn't mind me saying it this way, would you? When the mind becomes an arahant, because it is not anyone that becomes an arahant, it is the mind that becomes an arahant, no suffering remains whatsoever. So if no suffering remains, and the only application of the Dhamma was towards cleansing the mind, and as a result attachment has been gotten rid of entirely, for the mind to become an arahant, then as there is no suffering left, we have to come to the conclusion that there was nothing else there to suffer out of attachment. Because if there were, and only the mind is freed from attachment, only the thoughts are freed from attachment, then suffering should still continue to exist, even in the mind of an arahant. But that is not true. That is not so. So what is it that vexes? The answer is whatever it is that attaches. If it is the thought that attach, then it is the thought that vexes. Could you ask the question, who now? Or is a more appropriate question, what? You need to try and learn to look at yourself as more of a what than a who. So much so that the question, who are you, is flawed. How are you doing is also flawed. To be technically accurate, you'd have to ask, how is the body doing and how is the mind doing? But of course, for convenience, as we live in a conventional world, we talk in these terms. But as you start to dip your toes into the absolute world of reality, you begin to realize that a lot of the time we live in a story. We live a tale. We live in a drama. That we're all characters in a drama. The true us is really simply the coming together of mind and body. The mind, its mental factors, form, and nibbana. These are the four ultimate truths. Everything else is a conventional convenience. Should they be gotten rid of? Absolutely none. Why? Because for convenience, it would make living life incredibly difficult if it weren't for conventional truths. They make life livable. Without the conventional truths, it would be so incredibly difficult for anyone to get by and do anything. The absolute truths are essential for us to understand how things work in the conventional world included. However, The conventional truths are just as important and just as necessary as the absolute truths. But the truth is that what really exists are thoughts, mental factors, form, and Nibbana. These are the absolute truths, as proclaimed by the Buddha, and as we are beginning to realize is the case. So, who or what is vexing when the mind is passing away? Let us think of it as in terms of chittas that arise and pass away. So, when a chitta passes away, how much time before the next chitta? That is akin to asking, by someone stood by the bank of a river and asking a question similar to, I see the river and it must be made of water. When a drop of water in front of me passes away or flows past, then how long does it take for the next drop of water to replace it? Just like one leaves only when there's one behind it that pushes it along, in the example of water in a river, similarly, chittas pass away when the next chitta is ready to arise. So you're not going to get a time where there's going to be a void between two chittas. Unless we are, of course, talking about an extremely deep state of samadhi, in which all thoughts cease to arise. But that is not the point of discussion for our sermon today, and we needn't go there. To keep it in broad and general terms, there is no gap between two chittas. One leaves when the next one is ready to take its place. That is how it always works. So when the thoughts, it is said here, when the mind is passing away, but as we discussed, let's take the thought or the chittas, whichever way you want to look at it. When the chittas pass away, before it arises again. See, this question assumes that there is a gap between the two. It assumes that there's a gap between two chittas. And therefore, in that gap, what happens is the question. But as I said, just like water flowing in a river, in a strong, gushing river, where one drop of water is instantly and immediately replaced by the drop of water following it, right behind it. Likewise, when a chitta passes away, it passes away when the next chitta is about to rise. So there is no gap between these two. And with every chitta, every step of the way, tainted in attachment, it would be impossible to say if there was any time where the chittas were able to experience complete freedom from suffering. So what is this experience of relief from vexation? Well, the truth of the matter is, every chitta that arises is looking for something, looking for meaning, looking to be present, looking to be aware. And when the opportunity presents itself, the chitta arises and passes away. In the presence of attachment, as it passes away, of course, now we know the way to test if something or someone is attached to something. As it passes away, whatever arose in the mind that was triggered as the thought object now has to pass away along with it. So therefore, with every chitta that arises, you are presented with this situation where attachment remains and the chitta passes away. So it would then, of course, not be appropriate to ask, well, where does attachment remain? Does it remain in the chitta, but the chitta has passed away? That's not quite what we imply here. The nature of attachment remains. Attachment as a phenomenon remains. Attachment as a characteristic remains. Why? Well, because ignorance remains. So for as long as ignorance remains, attachment remains. And for as long as attachment remains, in that environment, every chitta that arises will pass away. Suffering. So, who is vexing? The real question is, what is vexing? But then again, when the mind has passed away, before it arises again, you're asking, what is vexing then? That part of this does not make sense, because there is nothing that happens between, or rather there is nothing that takes the gap between two thoughts. Thought after thought after thought, there are no gaps here. So therefore, drenched in attachment and ignorance, every thought will contain suffering. That is the way it works. How does relief from vexation happen? Well, whatever the thought was attached to, when received from the outside, as we discussed right at the start of this, how it is that a physical stimuli can cause a mental response. When the physical environment around the chitta provides the chitta with what it's looking for, what it yearns, then all this time that vexation that was held in the mind, that passes away. The vexation is relieved. Rather than passing away, we could say it is relieved. Why? Because it is now presented with the opportunity to experience the very thing that it so long wanted, or it wanted for this long, all the while. So that's the principle here. And the other thing to consider here, folks, is without the body and the mind, you wouldn't sense anything. So, a physical sensation would be experienced only because you have a body, and mental emotions are only experienced because you have a mind. even if there were something that took the place between two chittas passing away and one arising, even if there were something in between this gap, you needn't worry, because it is only through mind and body that you can experience pain and suffering. So if it is not the mind that is suffering, and if it is not the body that is suffering, then you needn't worry, because nothing else can suffer, and for you to feel that the pain of it, nothing else can suffer that can cause you pain. It is only mind or body. So even if there were something that took the place between two chittas, you needn't worry about it, because you wouldn't suffer as a result of that. So inversely, there is nothing that exists between two chittas. So therefore, every chitta is an opportunity, unfortunately, to suffer. And every chitta is an opportunity to relieve itself from suffering or vexation. And finally, every chitta is also an opportunity to free the mind of vexation through the freeing of attachment. Now I know this sounds a little bit heavy. It may come across as heavy, and it may have some aspects that we have discussed which, if you hadn't joined the previous sermons, then you may not have followed, but that's okay, not to worry. Because from time to time, we take the liberty to mix up general day-to-day advice and instructions and guidance, which is really the most important part of the practice, with something a little bit heavy, something a little bit more heavy lifting for those who may be more familiar with concepts of the Dhamma. And this is one of those. It's a good question, most certainly, but a question that has been raised by not knowing that there is really nothing between two chittas as they arise and pass away. So now we do. Now we do, and therefore that has been most helpful. I'm going to take another question here. Hopefully something a little bit lighter. So here's another one. This is from the sermon that was titled Mortal Combat. Fight for your right to die. And the question goes something like this. Thank you for revealing this cast iron guarantee. I knew nothing of it. I think this is in reference to the guarantee that if you were to become a Sotapanna, in the duration of this Buddha Sasana, then before the end of the Sasana itself, you would leave the karma worlds, the sensual sphere, for good, by becoming an anagami person. So Yet I cannot figure out how the Buddha, Metteyya, I think referring to Maitreya, comes into it. It is stated that beings with any stage of Margapala will exit the Kamaloka on the end of a Buddha's sasana. And that is true, yes. At the end of the Buddha's sasana, there can no longer be any disciple of the Buddha or a disciple of the Buddha who has achieved the Margapala. What has the arising of another Buddha after that got to do with it? How will it affect it? If the Buddha Gautama were the last Buddha in this Mahakappa, any Arya would still exist the Kamaloka before the end of the Sasana, so why be grateful that Buddha Maitreya will be appearing, or is there something I am missing? I think the point is this. You don't need the Buddha Maitreya to come along for you to exit the Kama world if you were to become a Sotapanna. The guarantee that we get is that when a Buddha Sasana comes to an end, then there will not be any person who has achieved any fruit. So the four fruits being Sotapanna, Sakradagami, Anagami, and Arahant in the Kama world. So that is true, and you don't need the Maitreya Buddha for that. However, we are extremely fortunate to be where we are today because, of course, we are all making diligent effort to achieve this Margapala. And even if you were to become at least a Sotapanna, now you have a guarantee that in the next 2,500 years, you would become an Anagami and exit the Kama world. That's the bare minimum. However, in the event that you are unable to become a Sotapanna, the added advantage that we have in this period is that in this Mahakappa, we are going to receive another Buddha. So any efforts made to become a Sotapanna, and how does one make an effort to become a Sotapanna? By listening to the Dhamma, by engaging in every meritorious opportunity that one can get involved in, earning as much merits as they possibly can, by seeking forgiveness for any trespassing of speech, body, and mind, for stepping over the line, passing offense or desecration of that which is sacred, seeking forgiveness for these things, making efforts to do that will prepare you as a perfect candidate for the Maitreya Buddha's Shasana. Therefore, as in this Mahakalpa we will witness the advent of 5 Buddhas in total. And it is the 4th Buddha, that was the Buddha Gautama, who passed away 2,500 years ago. If you were to become a Sotapanna in this Shasana, now you have another 2,500 years at most in which you will remain in the sensual worlds. At the end of that 2,500 years, there's a guarantee that you will, not by some kind of supernatural power or anything like that, but you will be inclined to your practice, or to continue with your practice, and you will exit the Kama worlds, the sensual world, in the next 2,500 years. However, what I was trying to say with the Maitreya Buddha is, even if you fail to become a Sotapanna, any efforts you make now are all going to be very helpful, because the next Buddha will arrive in this Mahakalpa. So therefore, any practice you make, any effort that you put towards it will always be useful, advantageous, and beneficial to try to make you a good candidate to be presented to the Maitreya Buddha upon his arrival. But of course, I know none of us should ideally have that intention to see the Maitreya Buddha and pass into Parinibbana when, of course, the Gautama Buddha's Dhamma is still present and very much so with us. So you have 2,500 years in which you can completely achieve this. Even if you were to become a Sotapanna on one day prior to the through the remainder of the 2,500 years, as in the end of the 5,000-year period that the Buddha proclaimed his Shasana would prevail. Even if you were to become a Sotapanna a day before the end of that 5,000 years, then in the following day, you will fulfill the remainder of your Margapala and attain Arahathood, or at least exit the sensual world and go into the Brahma worlds. So this is the guarantee that I spoke of. At least this is the guarantee that I intended. So thank you for the question, and hopefully that has made things a bit clearer. I'll take another question. Here it says, I'm a PhD student studying cancer pathology here in New Zealand. However, when I listen to the Dhamma sermons, I have a feeling that what I do is useless. I have to do drug testing on mice, which will eventually help humans live longer. This project I agreed to do before I was a listener to Venerable Guru Swami Nohanse, and she's mentioned the Swami Nohanse's name, and their sermons revealing the truth of life. Even though I do not kill animals, I know what I do is really bad, and as a Buddhist, I'm in such a dilemma. Can you help me with some of your future sermons? I do listen to all of the sermons. This will be a help for me. I really do appreciate it. Okay. So what do you do? What is the answer you expect from me? Is probably the question I need to ask in return, in response to this. What is the reply that you expect from me? Is it a good thing to provide the means for people to live longer and live a life that is free, that is less prone to suffering? And the answer is yes, it is. Is it wrong to hurt, harm, or kill, or be directly involved in the hurting or harming or killing of other animals? Well, then the answer is yes, it is wrong. So what if you have to do the latter for the former? Then is it good or is it bad? Unfortunately, it's more complicated than that. What's good is good. What's bad is bad. If through good you try and do something bad, still what is good, what is bad is bad. If through what is bad you're trying to do what is good, still good is good and bad is bad. The intention to help people live longer, the intention to help people fight diseases and to help them live a satisfying and fulfilling life is a good thing. That is meritorious. However, any intention to take a life, to hurt or harm another being, the same cannot be said of that. Here the dilemma is, you're doing what I think you're suggesting yourself is something that is useless and something that is bad, possibly to achieve something useful and something that is good. So therefore the question is, am I doing the right thing, am I doing the wrong thing? My answer is, what is right is right, what is wrong is wrong. What is good, what is bad. But what if you do this for that? You shouldn't be asking that question. Well, you can ask, but the answer is still going to be, what is good, what is bad. Normally, living in this kind of world that we are in today, unless of course you find ways and means to enter the sasana, I really don't see any other way that it is possible. That may just be my short-sightedness, but I've got to admit, any other enterprise or venture you engage in, I find it impossible to see how anyone could do only good and not even the tiniest modicum of bad. I struggle to see how that is possible, except for in the sasana. That is not to say that everyone who enters the sasana only does that, but in the sasana, you have the opportunity to do only good and not do any bad. The Buddha designed it that way, so that people could choose that way of life. So is it good again to develop cancer, treating or fighting drugs to help people live longer and to live more fulfilling and satisfying lives? The answer is yes. Is it a bad thing to kill animals, hurt them and harm them? Again, the answer is yes, provided that is the intention. Is one good because you did it by using the other? I have to say you're asking the wrong question. So what must one do if they find themselves in this dilemma? Every good thing you do is going to bring you good results, and every bad thing you do may bring you bad results. Why do I say may? Could it be that it also brings good results? No, that's not what I mean by that. When the opportunity is prime for these vipakas to bear fruit, then they will. That is why it is not always that what you do today, be that good or bad, will reap you rewards and results in the same lifetime. That can be very different. If that were not the case, then you wouldn't be able to hear of any arahants who would travel to the Deva worlds. Think about that for a second. So, it is said, of course, here that even though I do not kill animals, I know what I do is really bad. So it's a great thing that you do not kill animals. That's brilliant. I think the issue here is that you may be involved in testing on animals, and you believe and you say that it is a bad thing to do. So what must you do? This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? What must I do? Unfortunately, the only answer I can provide you there, sir, madam, possibly a lady, well, really, there's no hint to go by. I don't know. There's only one answer I can provide though. Whatever is good, do as much of it as possible. Whatever is bad, do as little, if not nothing of it, as possible. Whatever is good, do as much of it as possible. If it's bad, if something's bad, then, and you cannot avoid doing it, then do as little of it as possible. Ideally, none at all. And where the two things seem to be at odds, what must you do? Again, we are back to that question. If the two seem to be at odds, what must you do? Well, then it may be that you have to ask yourself, is it fair on you that you have put yourself in a position where you have to choose between doing good and doing bad? Is it fair on you? Is it fair on your salvation? Are you doing justice by yourself? Yes, it's helping humankind, it's helping mankind and all the rest of it. That is all very true. And I do not belittle that any bit. But are you doing justice by yourself? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that question because it is you yourself to answer. So you must think about that. What looks like has happened is you've gotten yourself into a position where you have to do a mix of good and bad. Is that fair upon you? Is that reasonable to do for yourself? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that. I have chosen this life of monkhood because one main reason for having chosen this life as a monk is that there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that twists my arm. There's no force that tells me or manipulates me or requires me to do something bad, something against my conscience. There is encouragement to only do good things, but there's never any encouragement to do any of the bad stuff. So, unfortunately, that's as far as I can go with this, with an answer to this question, sir or madam, because I think the answer to the question is obvious to you, which is why you have posed this question. From reading it, that is what I sense. I feel that you already know the answer to this question, but you're looking for me to second your opinion. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's something that we do all the time. We ask questions knowing fully well what the answer to them is, or what the answer to them are, but we expect and we hope that someone else can conform to that idea, can agree with us. And in someone sharing our opinion, we seek satisfaction. We seek respite. So that is why I feel that the person who's asked this question already knows the answer. They know fully well that helping humans live longer and a carefree life, free of sickness and ailment, is a tremendously meritorious deed to do. But I feel they also know that hurting animals and harming them is a bad thing to do. So you know the answer to this question. Perhaps you were looking for me to agree with you I agree that what is good and what is bad is bad. Doing bad for the sake of good is not something that I can condone. But doing good is good and doing bad is bad. That I can tell you categorically. What good you do will bring you rewards. Whatever bad you do may bring you demerit and may bring you suffering. But whatever good you do, I like to say will, but again, we can't say when the things you do will bring you good results or good rewards, so we're just going to have to say may. But that is not because there's any doubt about that. It's simply a case of not if, but rather a case of when. So that is the answer, I'm afraid, to that question. I'm not sure that is what you expected from me, but that is the answer to that question. So we've covered a few questions there, something a bit lighter than what was discussed previously, but also something to amuse, or rather something to pique interest of our more analytical audience as well. We discussed at the start of the sermon. If you didn't get much of that, I wouldn't worry about it. But as the question has been asked, and I think it's been on the question sheet for some time now, I thought it would only be fair that a response was provided. We will discuss these concepts in more detail in the future, so not to worry. But what's most important is, of course, the application of what we have learned, the Dhamma, into our day-to-day lives, which is why the vast majority of our sermons are focused towards those aspects of the Dhamma. Today has been a little bit heavy. It has been quite a bit theoretical, and I think that is probably welcome from time to time as well. But if you ask me, my personal preference is always to focus the sermons on the more practical aspects of the application of the Dhamma, because that is truly where I see results in both myself and other people. That's the way that I operate. That's the way the Dhamma works its magic on myself. So I feel it is probably the way it does it for most people. But having said that, no regrets whatsoever. Today has been a little bit heavy, and I will be the first to admit. But go back and listen to it once or twice if you have the time, and that may help understand things a little bit further. But if not, not to worry either. We will go back and revisit these concepts on a future date. Okay, so on that note then, let us take a moment to transfer the merits that we have acquired in listening to and preaching the Dhamma, and we will bring the sermon to a conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, then, let us take a moment to transfer the merits that we have all acquired by making offerings to the infinite virtues of the Noble Triple Gem, chanting, listening to the Dhamma, and engaging in various meritorious deeds today. First and foremost, let us remind ourselves how incredibly fortunate we are to be in receipt of the Lord Buddha's teaching. And with immense gratitude, let us transfer these merits to the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, upasakas and upasikas, who since time immemorial have protected and preserved the sublime teachings of the Buddha and passed it down through the generations of the noble lineage in the form of the Tripitaka, which is thankfully available to us today to study, understand and comprehend the Dhamma. Let us also transfer the merits we have acquired to all members of the Mahasangha present throughout the world, including the chief prelates of all of the chapters who have dedicated their lives to the noble path and have committed themselves towards the betterment of all sentient beings. Let us not forget that among them are the monks and nuns resident in your local temples and nunneries, who have always been by your side through thick and thin, come rain or shine. Let us also transfer these merits to Guru Swami Mahansa and all other monks resident at this monastery, as well as the Anagarikas and Anagarikas attached to the monastery. Let us also take a moment to transfer these merits and express our gratitude to those who make great efforts to disseminate the teachings of the Buddha, be that by transliterating these sermons, sharing them out with others, or inviting others to join them. And may, through the power of these merits, if any of them have been born in the woeful plane, redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. And may, through the power of these merits, they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sad, sad, sad. Let us also transfer the merits we have acquired to our devotees and friends of the monastery, who, for the sake of merits, continue to sustain the Mahasangha. This includes everyone from those of you who have contributed to the construction of the monastery to those of you who provide the Mahasangha with shelter, alms, robes, and medicines, as well as those who have passed on their know-how and continue to extend their well wishes. May, through the power of these merits, they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer merits to our mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, nephews and nieces, our elders, friends and acquaintances, employers and employees, and to all those who have helped us and supported us, assisted us in any way, shape or form. By the power of these merits, may they be healed of any physical and mental ailments and overcome any obstacles to their spiritual progress. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sad, sad, sad. Let us also take a moment to transfer merits to the Devas and Brahmas, spirits and demons, primarily the Sakadeva, as well as all the numerous gods and deities who are committed to protect and fulfill the Samdhashasana. Let us also transfer merits to our guardian deities who keep a watchful eye over us and keep us out of harm's way. And may, through the power of these merits, they prosper in divine power and wisdom. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer merits to our ancestors who have predeceased us, to all who have been our families, friends, and acquaintances in this infinite long journey in samsara, and who have helped us, supported us, assisted us in every way they could. Let us take a moment to transfer these merits to them. Let us also transfer merits to the members of the armed forces as well as the police force who have sacrificed their lives to protect the peace and harmony of our nation and continue to do so. May all who have lost their lives in the war, be they friend or foe, rejoice in the merits that we have acquired today. Let us also transfer merits to all those who have lost their lives in natural calamities such as tsunamis and earthquakes, landslides and pandemics, including the most recent and prevailing one. Reminding ourselves that among them will be those who have been friends and family to us in this long journey in samsara. Let us take a moment to transfer these merits to them, and may, through the power of these merits, if any of them have been born in the woeful planes, redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sad, sad, sad. And finally, let us all resolve that may, through the power and blessings of all the merits we have acquired throughout the day, we be able to witness the advent of many hundreds of thousands of Arahatun Mahanses and Arahat Mehin Mahanses on this blessed land. And finally, may, through the power of all the merits we have acquired today, you and I and everyone who has helped make this program a success, become an Arahatun Mahanse or Arahat Mehin Mahanse in this very life itself and in the era of the Gautama Supreme Buddha itself. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And on that note, we will conclude today's sermon. May the blessings of the Noble Triple Gem be with you all.